All right, let's dive into this really fascinating idea from the philosopher J. Krishnamurti. He gives us this radical new way of looking at ourselves. He suggests that the story of you is actually a book, one that's way more ancient and vast than you could ever imagine. So let's just start with a question. A question that really challenges a super fundamental assumption that we make, every single day.
I mean, what if that whole stream of thoughts, feelings, all the anxieties and the joys that you call me, what if it isn't some private, unique thing that belongs to you? What if it's something shared? See, Krishnamurti's idea is that your consciousness isn't some little isolated island. Not at all. Instead, it's like a living library that has the entire story of humanity inside it. Every single struggle, every discovery, every fear and every joy that humans have ever experienced, it's all right there, inside you.
And here's where it gets really important. When you feel loneliness, it's not just your personal loneliness. It's the loneliness of all mankind. Your sorrow is the sorrow of mankind. And this just completely flips the script, right? It goes from being a personal problem to a universal human condition. Okay, so that brings us to the real challenge here. If you are this immense, living history, how in the world do you even begin to understand it? What kind of tool would you even use to read something so complex and alive? So where do we usually start? Well, our immediate instinct, our go-to move, is to use the most trusted instrument we have for figuring anything out, our own thought. We try to analyze it, to break it down, to come to a conclusion.
But what is thought, really, when you get down to it? From this point of view, thought isn't some free, creative force. It's just a mechanism built entirely from the past, from everything you've ever learned, ever experienced, ever remembered. In a way, it's all secondhand.
And here is the central paradox. If your consciousness is the history of the past, and thought is also made from the past, then you're trying to read the book using an instrument that's made out of the book's own pages. Thought is part of the content, so there's no way it can read it objectively. See, thought is fundamentally conditioned. It's trapped. It can only operate within what it already knows. But this book of mankind, it's a living, breathing, moving thing. So if thought is the wrong instrument for the job, we've got to find a completely different way of seeing. And this leads us to a really key distinction that helps solve this whole puzzle. It's the difference between the brain and what Krishnamurti calls the mind, with a capital M. Okay, this contrast is everything. On one hand, you have the brain. That's our physical hardware. I mean, it's done incredible things, technologically speaking, right? But psychologically, it often gets stuck in the same old loops and patterns. But then, on the other hand, there's the mind. And that's something else entirely. It's an unconditioned, universal intelligence that isn't limited by our personal history. So as long as our brain is only operating through that filter of past thought, it just can't tap into this vaster dimension. The whole challenge, then, isn't to get a new brain, but to see if this brain we have can operate without the constant chatter, without the interference of its own conditioning. So, if thought is out, what's left? What do we use? Well, it turns out there's a different kind of instrument altogether. Not thinking, but a state of total, choiceless perception. So what does this new way of seeing actually look like? Well, it's about looking and listening and sensing with such totality that thought, that little voice that says, oh, I like this, or I don't like that, or that's a tree, it just doesn't come up. And in that silence, that feeling of a separate you who's doing the observing, it starts to dissolve. Just imagine it for a second. You're looking at the ocean with every sense totally alive. You're not thinking about the ocean, you're just purely seeing its movement and hearing its sound. In that moment, there's no separation between you and the sea. There's only the perception itself. That is the new instrument. Now, this new way of seeing, this perception without an observer, it leads us to this really stunning conclusion that just completely reframes the entire problem we started with. So, after this whole journey, we circle right back to that central question from the beginning. And the answer is a total pivot. It turns out you don't. You don't read it at all. The entire idea of reading the book was the wrong metaphor to begin with. It implies that you're separate from it, like a scholar studying some object. See, this book, this story of humanity, it's not some static book on a shelf with a first chapter and a last page. It is a continuous, living movement that is constantly, right now, unfolding. It's not something you can finish or figure out. And this is the ultimate realization. The goal isn't to become some master reader of your own consciousness. The real insight is to see that you are the consciousness. You are the entire, endless, unwritten story of mankind. And that doesn't leave us with some neat, tidy answer. It leaves us with a far more profound and living question. If you are not a separate reader, but you are the story itself, well, how does that change the very way you live each and every moment?